Okay, let me say a few words about the institute that I work with. It's called Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. Menachem Begin was the Prime Minister of Israel. Anwar Sadat was the President of Egypt. Both of them signed the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel in the 70s. The center was established in 1993 by Professor Ephraim Bar. He's a member of the political science department. The center focus mainly, it's defined as a little bit conservative, but it allows other issues or other views to be said and published. It focuses mainly on Israeli security, but covers other issues as well. For example, public diplomacy, nuclear issues, chemical weapons, American politics, European politics, but mainly focusing what influenced Israel's policy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the current Prime Minister of Israel, decided a few years ago to give his keynote speech, the two-state solution, at the Besa Center, showing how important this center is for the government. The Institute has a constructive dialogue with the government, with other institutions all around the world, and we hope to have a dialogue with your institute as well. So, let me start. Korea, Middle East. When I landed in Korea, I was asked, does Korea have a policy towards the Middle East? And I had to convince my Korean fellow to say that, yes, Korea has a policy. I sometimes disagree with this policy, but it has a policy. It has a few pillars, and I'll talk about it for a few seconds. The first pillar is the North Korea. North Korean threat influences Korean policy. It's for example, finding solution in the Middle East for the North Korean threat. In the 60s and in the 70s, and even the beginning of the 80s, the relation between Korea, South Korea, and the Middle East was influenced by the issue of legitimation, because there was a battle of legitimation between North Korea and South Korea, and each country was trying to gain more and more international legitimation. The alliance with the United States. One of the important pillars in any policy of Korea is what will the United States say. And the alliance is very important and vital element in Korea's policy. And as I'll show, during the First and Second Gulf War, Washington forced Korea to make a decision towards the Middle East. Now, the third pillar is the economy. And I'll show that in the 50s, and let's say until the 70s, the relation between Korea and the Middle East were not that important, because the Korean economy was not that developed, and the Middle East economy was not that developed as well. So there was no incentive to create relation between Korea and the Middle East. But later on, the economy started, because of the development of the Korean economy and the development of the Middle East economy, the economy became an influential factor in Korea's policy, and I'll show you it became a very influential factor in Korea's policy towards Israel especially. Now, self-perception. I'm not criticizing, but I'm raising the question here that Korea's policy to the Middle East was focusing mainly differentiate between politics and economy. But in this case, the question is, what is Korea's role, not just in the region, but globally? If Korea defines itself as the middle power, what does it mean, a middle power? Does it mean that it's just an economic middle power? And this is fine with me. But if you define yourself as a middle power, and you say a middle power includes political and security issues, that means you have to take a stand. Sometimes you have to pay for it. But you can stick to the economic middle power. The last pillar, it didn't influence in the 70s, 80s. It will start to influence in the new millennium. It's the China factor. China is getting involved in the Middle East. China is pushing out Korean economy, Korean companies, including influencing the Korean economy, and Korea should take it into consideration. Now, as I said, because of the economy, because of interest, because of Korea being occupied with the Korean War and other issues, in the 50s and the 60s, the relation between Korea and the Middle East, and the Middle East and Korea was almost irrelevant. Turkey was the only Middle Eastern state that participated in the Korean War. About 721 soldiers, Turkish soldiers, were killed during the war. Israel, on the other hand, in those days, Israel was very politicized. Part of Israel were influenced by the Soviet Union. So there was a political and ideological debate in the 50s between the Communist Party and Israel, which said we should support North Korea, while the conservative and the Prime Minister said we should support South Korea. At the end, in order to prevent ideological clashes within Israel, the government decided to support South Korea, to send medical and food to the Korean War. Later on, we tried in the UN to help South Korea. One should remember that South Korea was not a member of the UN until the 1990s. Turkey and Israel were the first countries to establish, from the Middle East, to establish diplomatic relations with South Korea, but the bilateral relations were very limited in those days. So, for example, if you combine United Arab Emirates, Israel, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Libya, Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, the total trade with South Korea between 65 and 69 was only $125 million, which is nothing. In comparison, just with France in those years were 86 million, and with Japan was almost $3 billion. Korea was influenced by the Cold War as well as the Middle East, and the Middle East was divided between pro-US nations such as Jordan, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia, which were more favorable of South Korea, and pro-Soviet nations such as Yemen, Syria, and Sudan, which were pro-Soviet Union, and they had relation with North Korea and not with South Korea. Until now, Korea has relation with most of the Middle Eastern states. Syria is the only exception, and Korea doesn't have diplomatic relation with Syria until now. With the rise of the economy, of the South Korean economy at the end of the 60s, Park Chung-hee era, these companies, the South Korean companies, chaebols, were looking for markets outside of Korea, and the Middle East was a wonderful place to trade with. The oil boom on those days led to Korean companies going to the Middle East to do business. The Middle East were looking for companies, and the Korean companies were a wonderful opportunity because Korean companies were inexpensive, had the experience to build huge construction and infrastructure projects. There was a government backing. The government was willing to back financially all the projects, and for countries from the Middle East, it was a wonderful assurance. And the last, some would say, an important thing is South Korean companies didn't have an ideological aspiration. For example, one might think that American companies or French companies might have some kind of an ideological aspiration to conquer or to control these states. Some of them, for example, Lebanon, until now, France sees itself as the owner of Lebanon. And if you compare, you see the change in the 70s. If in the 65 to 69, it was $125 million, it leaped to almost $2 billion between 70 and 74, and 75 till the end of the 70s, it was almost $15 billion. It shows how important the Middle East became to Korea. Now, Korea's economy was developing, and its dependency on oil and gas from the Middle East increased. And the number of projects, the billions of dollars projects that they were doing in the Middle East, increased their dependency on the Middle East. Now, I want you to remember in the beginning of the 70s, there was the oil embargo and the Arab boycott on any company that trades with Israel, and the price tag of having a relation with the state of Israel was high. Korea understood that its relation with Israel has a huge price tag, and it endangers the billions of dollar projects that they're doing in the Middle East, and that is why its policy towards Israel in those years was very cautious. Now, in the 70s, the Israeli Foreign Office I should correct myself, the Israeli foreign minister made a decision to close the embassy, to close the Israeli embassy in Seoul, because he misunderstood the implication of closing the embassy, and he misunderstood the constraints that Korea living with the Middle East. But one should remember that in the 70s, for Israel, any vote in the UN was important, and Korea was not a member of the UN. Another thing, the trade with Korea was very, very limited, and Korea didn't see it Israel didn't see Korea as an important state. And another symbol is, although relations between Israel and Korea were established in '62, Korea didn't send an ambassador while Israel sent from the 60s. There was an Israeli ambassador in Korea. There was no ambassador in Israel, and Israel saw it as a symbol that Korea doesn't see Israel as an important state. I would say that even if the ambassador would have decided not to close the embassy, the relation would have stayed very limited because of Korean interest in those days. So, as I said, in 1978, the Israeli Israel foreign ministry decided to close the embassy, and it took us another 20 years to reopen the embassy. The reason was Korea was offended, but at the same time, it didn't serve Korea's interest in the Middle East that an embassy would reopen in those days. Now, the Middle East, as you know, is full of opportunities, but full of risks. Wars are important for scholars in political science and security studies, peace studies as well. Korea's policy towards the Middle East was neutral policy. We are an impartial player in the Middle East. We focus on trade. We don't focus on politics. For us, trade is more important. We don't want to intervene in politics within the Middle East. Except one issue, it's the Israel-Palestinian conflict, a resolution 242338 concerning the Middle East solution. They said we support it, but that's it. They didn't comment. They didn't give any additional comments. Now, Iran-Iraq war. I'm talking Iran-Iraq war. It's the war from in the 80s. Demonstrate the risk of business in the Middle East. Korea had business with those countries, and the war decreased the trade between these two states, but it demonstrates Korea's impartial policy, because Korea was able to trade with both states, with Iraq and Iran, all along the war, because those states didn't see Korea as a state that has a policy of supporting Iran or Iraq. The end of the war, Korea, not just Korea, all the countries saw a potential for doing business of reconstruction, building projects in Iraq and Iran, and the Korean companies won about $750 million of projects, of reconstruction projects in Iraq, and about $250 million of project in Iran. But the Middle East, mainly Saddam Hussein, had different plans, and he invaded Kuwait. So all the plans of Korean companies were evaporated a little bit. Now, the first Gulf War forced Korea to make a decision. Should we intervene in the war, or shouldn't we intervene in the war? And the dilemma was very problematic, because the United States asked Korea to send forces to Iraq to fight in the war. Korea was lucky in the first Gulf War because in those days it was a legitimate war. More than 30 countries participated in the war, and Korea had enough forces. And the United States had enough forces in the war. If you ask the Americans, I'm sure they would say we need only five states to participate, and the rest can stay at home. But the symbol was important. Now, during the second Gulf War, it was a different ballgame, because only few states supported the United States. It was the British, if I'm not mistaken, the French, and Washington was pressuring Korea and was pressuring and was pressuring Japan as well, you should send forces. Now the question is, how important is the alliance with the United States? Can we tell our biggest ally, no, we can't, or yes, we can? Can we tell the Americans we're not willing to send forces? At the first Gulf War, we were able to say we can skip this war. But on the second Gulf War, there was no option, because the Americans were saying, we want to see boots on the ground. And we don't have enough legitimacy, so we want your forces in Iraq. So what happened is, the president said, yes, we have to send forces, but no, we won't send our forces to the battle zone. And the Korean forces were sent to, not to the battle zone. They were dealing with construction, they were dealing with civilian projects, and the Korean were telling all the time, we are participating in the war because it was legitimized by the UN, but we're not fighting in the war because we're not taking sides. In a way, business and politics. We are supporting the Iraqi people, we're building civilian projects, but we're not fighting anyone. In the 1990s, the Middle East peace process decreased the sanction of the Arab boycott. The Arab boycott is alive and kicking in the minds of the South Korean government and some of the South Korean business. They think that if they will improve their relation with Israel, the Arab boycott will arise. The Oslo peace process between Israel and the Palestinians and the Israel-Jordanian peace treaty created a positive environment in the Middle East and an environment that allowed Korea to improve its relation with Israel. So at the beginning of the 90s, Israel was allowed to reopen its embassy after almost 20 years, and Korea opened an embassy in Israel. One should remember, we established relations in '62, and only in the beginning of the 90s, 30 years later, Korea opened an embassy. Late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin visited Kim Jong-sam in 1994. It was an excellent visit. They created a bonding, and this visit was able to break the ice between the two states and to improve relations between the two states. Now, we have Arab specialists, Middle Eastern specialists. So I'll say a few words about the Arab Spring, or some call it the Islamic Winter. Depends on your ideology. Some say that in the Cold War it was the best era. The world was divided to two. Now it's divided to, some would say tribes, some would say Sunni, Shia. It's very complicated. If you look in the Middle East, if I would ask some of you, what do you, in the beginning of the 90s, what do you think will happen a decade later? No one would have guessed that this would what might happen. Now we have Libya, we have Syria, Egypt, concerned about Jordan, and the list is long. One of the questions that allies within the region and allies even in Asia were questioning is concern about Washington's ability to influence the process. If you follow the news, what happened in Egypt, Washington was supporting the Brother Muslimhood, and then they were supporting the army, and then they don't know what to do, and then they can't influence. In the Syrian case, President Obama was saying there's a red line. If you use a chemical weapon, we'll have to interfere. And at the end of the day, they didn't interfere. And states were questioning the American commitment towards its allies. And questioning, does it have an implication on Asia? And Israel was asking, does it have an implication on Israel? Can we do a peace process with the backing of the US? Yes or no? Concerning Korea were raised because if you remember, you have peacekeeping forces in Lebanon, and people were concerned that instability in Syria might overflow to Lebanon, and they might target the South Korean forces in southern Lebanon. They targeted the Italian forces in southern Lebanon, and they just ran away back to Italy. While I would say in favor of the South Korean forces, they are still there, which is amazing. Now the question is not just Korea. Everyone asked the question: Who should we support? Should we support, for example, in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, a democracy? I know, a democracy. Should we support the army? In Syria, which sect of the opposition should we support? The Al-Qaeda, the moderate, the extremist, Assad? It's now very difficult to be a Middle Eastern expert. Business is more complicated. Business with the Middle East became more and more complicated for South Korea, and even South Korean workers, for example, in Libya, in Egypt, were under threat, and Im Yong-bak discussed the issue of evacuating all the South Korean workers from Libya, but at the end, I think it was not needed. One of the biggest concerns, not just for South Korea, but even for the United States, is will the Arab Spring start in the Persian Gulf? Once you remember, Persian Gulf states are important gas and oil producer, and what might be the implication will be another IMF crisis, but not in Asia. It will be a global economic crisis, and we pray that it won't happen. Korea has a potential. That's why I ask you what's the difference between KDI and your institute. Korea has a potential of assisting the new regime that might arise after the end of the Arab Spring. Korea has the experience of rapid economic development. Korea can assist by your institute, other institutes. For example, Korea Foundation has programs to assist. KOICA has projects, and they're doing wonderful projects in the Middle East. And Korea has the biggest advantages that other states that might intervene don't have. It's impartial policy. It doesn't have an imperialist, well, it has an imperialist history conquered by Japan, but Korea never conquered any country. So when it comes to help Middle East countries, they don't see her as a threat to their interest. Now, I'm for Israel, so we think we're in the center of the universe, but every country thinks we are the center of the universe. I want to talk for a few minutes about the relation between Korea and Israel. Now, both states share the same threats. I was here last time in March last year, and my friends in Israel were asking me, are you sure you want to go to Korea? Because it's a dangerous place. And I was telling him, no, Korea is a wonderful place. And when I met my Korean friends who studied in Israel, I said, how can they say that Korea is a dangerous place and Israel is more dangerous? So it all depends on your perspective. What do you think is more dangerous? So we share the same threats: missiles, nuclear, drones, etc. The list is long. We share the same source of threat, which is North Korea. Israel is concerned that the technology, nuclear technology, and missiles are sold by North Korea to a Middle Eastern state, mainly Syria and Iran. And in the case of the Middle East, in the case of Israel, some of the missiles that are sold to Iran and Syria are given to pass to Hezbollah, which is a militant group in the southern part of Lebanon, and Hamas, which is a militant group in the south part of Israel. Some of these organizations fired missiles produced with the technology, North Korean technology on Israel, and this is a potential for intelligence cooperation between the two states. Another potential is the missile defense system, what we call the Iron Dome defense system, that during the last operation in Gaza was doing a marvelous job in Israel. It was intercepting dozens of missiles that were targeted from Gaza towards Israel, and prevented the conflict from escalating. For example, if we wouldn't have the Iron Dome, the government had to intervene on an earlier stage. The Iron Dome can serve as a defense shield on Seoul. I'm not a salesperson. I'm just presenting my thoughts. Another problem that Korea faces in the recent 2 weeks is flying small airplanes, flying drones, visiting from North Korea, visiting the Blue House and other sites in Korea. Israel uses drones for a few years. We use them for surveillance and for tactical attacks, tactical strategic attacks. We used to target missile and mortar launcher and strategic sites all around the Middle East. And we are concerned as well that Hamas and Hezbollah might use it, and they have used it, like North Korea. So there is a potential for cooperation. And from reading the news, I found out that South Korea is buying 10 radar systems from Israel. Again, I don't sell them, but I just let you know. Nuclear threat. One of the biggest concerns that Israel has, well, your biggest concern is the nuclearized North Korea, but Israel is concerned from the cooperation between Iran and North Korea. Our biggest concern is, while everyone focuses on Iran to see if it develops its nuclear weapon, if it holds its nuclear weapon, or if it will conduct a nuclear test, our biggest concern is that North Korea will do the job for Iran. And for example, if the fourth test, or might be the third test, was done with the assistance of Iran, that means that Iran has now a nuclear bomb, and all the negotiation between Iran and Europe and the United States is just a game. It doesn't worth anything because Iran is nuclearized. Another problem that we are concerned with is that North Korea is willing to send its nuclear technology to anyone who wants to buy it. Korea doesn't have an ideology like Iran. Our ideology is, if you pay, we'll sell it for you. And in the summer, at the beginning of 2007, Israel and the United States found out that Syria is developing a nuclear program with the assistance of North Korea. And in September 6, 2007, Israel bombarded Deir ez-Zor nuclear site. The only state that condemned Israel was North Korea. The Syrian didn't comment. There is a huge potential for economic cooperation between the two states. We have just about $2.5 billion, but there's a huge potential. We should improve it. The technological cooperation between the two sides. What I want to say is the Arab boycott does not exist anymore. So it's time to improve the relation. And it's time to upgrade the diplomatic relation between the two states, and I'll say a few words about it. Now, late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin visited Korea. Benjamin Netanyahu visited Korea. President Shimon Peres visited Korea. No South Korean president visited Israel. No Prime Minister, Foreign Minister visited Israel. Im Yong-bak, for example, visited Turkey, visited the UAE to sell the power plant, the nuclear power plant. But he didn't stop by to have a drink in Jerusalem. We have a good coffee. I fully understand it. Business is important. We are a small country. The trade is only 2.5 billion, while with the Saudi Arabia is more than $100 billion. And every time that an official came to Israel, a Korean official came to Israel, they asked us on a low radar visit. So it's time to improve relations. I know that, for example, any American candidate president must visit Israel for his Jewish constituency. You don't have any Jewish constituency in Israel, but if you look at how many Chinese officials, the Chinese premier a few years ago came for a holiday to Israel for 7 days. The Japanese prime ministers visited Israel a few times, and it didn't influence their relation with the rest of the Middle East. Now, there are few solutions to bypass the concern or the fears in Korea that the Arab state might see it as an upgrade of diplomatic relation. One option is a spiritual, religious visit. If the president, some of your presidents are Christian, they want to have a pilgrimage visit to the Middle East, to Israel, and then they can come and visit Jerusalem. They can come and visit Bethlehem, which is in the Palestinian Authority. They can come Lake Galilee. We have many Christian sites. So it's some would say a semi-private. It's a spiritual. It doesn't have any diplomatic, political implication. Another solution is cultural promotion, and I spoke with the dean, the Korea Foundation. You want to promote Korean culture in Israel. The Israelis, I must say, it's the culture, the Korean culture. One should define it. Korean culture in Israel before the Hallyu and Korean culture after the Hallyu. It's a different dimension. The president can come and say, "I promote a Korean house. I want to develop a Korean, I don't know, something." Within Israel and within the Palestinian Authority, and then it's balanced, both Israel and the Palestine Authority. Another option is not culture. Koika, for example, Koika is doing wonderful things in the Middle East, doing wonderful things in the Palestinian Authority, building hospitals, building schools. The president or the foreign minister, or I don't know, can come to Israel and honor the opening of the new hospital in the Palestinian Authority, open a new research center in Israel, and by doing so, it can balance, or it can prevent the concerns in Korea that the air boycott might arise. Now, Seoul can play an important role in assisting the peace process in the Middle East. It's called confidence building measures, because, as I said again, Korea no one sees Korea as tilting to one of the sides. So being an impartial player can assist it to be more active. Now, these are the last questions that I want to ask myself. These are general questions. The first one is, does Korea has the will to do it? For the time being, it looks as if Seoul is willing to play a role in the Middle East, a political role. It's an incremental change. They're more and more involved, but still as a side player, not as an important player. Would the regional players legitimize Korea's involvement? They don't have anything against Korea. They have they're very positive towards Korea, because, as I said, they don't see Korea as a threat. They don't see Korea as have an ideological aspiration. So they will be very favorable if Korea want to assist the peace process with the CBM projects. It's a wonderful idea. And will the key players allow it? Key players, I mean Europe and the EU and the United States. As long as you don't interfere, or as long as you don't try to delegitimize their important role in the peace process, they will allow it. And Korea has a potential of getting more and more. Thank you very much.